Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frederick Winsness, and I'm with NetHope. I want to welcome everyone to yet another NetHope Solutions Center webinar. Today, we're pleased to talk about Nextlevel Maps. We're going to hear from case studies of PATH and NetHope collaboration with Mapbox. And before we get underway, I want to just go over a little bit of housekeeping rules. We do want to make this as interactive as possible, so please open up the chat window in WebEx and post your questions there. You'll see a little traffic back and forth there, and that might be interesting to keep an eye on as we go through the hour today. We're also recording this session today, so please look for a follow-up email with links to the recording, and the slides are going to be presented today, and feel free to share that with coworkers or others that you find that you think might be interested in the topic. At the very end, as you leave the webinar today, there will be a webinar satisfaction poll popping up in your browser. We'd certainly appreciate you taking a couple minutes to answer those to help us improve this webinar series as we go along. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Gabrielle Allman. She is with the Crisis Informatics team at NetHope. So, Gabby, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Frederick. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Gabrielle. I'm with NetHope's Crisis Informatics team. Here in the Crisis Informatics team, we have two jobs. One is to visualize and manage our operational information for when NetHope responds to emergencies. And we also facilitate best practices and lessons learned sharing between our consortium, so between our NGO members and our partners. Today we are going to, we have the opportunity to hear from Morena of Mapbox and Peter of PATH and learn more about what's coming over the horizon for GIS. So in our webinar today, we'll be talking about emerging trends in mapping and location technologies. We'll be looking at ways to prepare for and use the latest mapping technologies in humanitarian operations and communications. And we'll also be looking at how to engage multiple private sector companies when it comes to taking advantage of these new technologies. So a little bit about our speakers. Morena is the program manager with the community team at Mapbox, where she supports nonprofits and other positive impact organizations who want to use Mapbox tools to further their work. Prior to joining Mapbox, Morena worked with the nonprofit Namati, securing stronger legal protections for the land rights of rural and indigenous communities in Africa and Asia. Morena has also worked with First Nations in Canada in participatory community planning efforts. She holds a master's in natural resource management from Simon Fraser University and a bachelor's in environmental sciences from the University of Guelph. I think I pronounced that right. Peter is the global manager of technology and life sciences partnerships at PATH. At PATH, Peter is responsible for building private sector partnerships with focus on innovation, sustainability, and shared value in global health. Prior to joining PATH, Peter worked for an impact-led investor, Global Partnerships, and led international programs and capacity building efforts at SEA International, a humanitarian eye care organization. Peter holds a bachelor's degree in global studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a certificate in corporate social responsibility and sustainability from Copenhagen Business School. So with that, we have a lot of great material to share today. So I'm going to hand it off to Morena to get us started.
To share my screen here. Bear with me one moment. All right, and here we go. So thanks, Gabby, for setting the stage there. Just a quick overview of what we're going to get through today. I'm going to share a little bit about Mapbox, who we are, what our technology does, and how humanitarian and corporate actors are using our tools. And then we're going to hear some case studies from PATH and from NetHope about working with these sorts of mapping tools. And then we'll wrap up with some reflections about what it takes to use Mapbox tools and what to expect if you're diving into that. So first I wanted to start off who is Mapbox? We're a relative newcomer on the scene of mapping tools, so to give you a sense of our story and our background, the original Mapbox team was part of a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. called Development Seed that was working on the ground with organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, Doctors Without Borders, in places like Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Haiti. And where they were working, the maps were blank or incomplete or very out of date, and they quickly realized that they needed better tools to work with maps and location data. And so because they were a group of developers, they decided to build these tools. And they built them in a way using open data and open source tools so that a community of users could continue to improve upon these tools and push them to new levels of innovation. Today, Mapbox, the company, is over 400 people across 7 global offices with over 1.2 million registered developers using our tools. So why all of this growth? One of the reasons is that location is a growing and hot trend across a whole range of industries, from agriculture to government to telecommunications. And how we use location and maps is also changing. As the world gets more connected, we're moving from static maps to dynamic maps, and from desktop-based mapping tools to web-based tools. So I want to give just a high-level view of some of the major trends that we're seeing across corporate and nonprofit and humanitarian users. And then we'll kind of loop back to some more specifics. And I should say also, all of these slides have links in the notes that you'll get afterwards if you want to get into more details about them. So one of the most sort of striking trends in mapping is the use of dynamic web maps for data visualization and storytelling online. These tools allow you to work with really large data sets to do on-the-fly analysis and complex visualizations in your browser. In the corporate space, this is referred to sort of the business intelligence, business analytics trends. But also we see a lot of nonprofits and NGOs, researchers, and advocates using data to inform their decisions and communicate their decisions to wider audiences in formats that are intuitive and engaging and very attention-grabbing. Like this example from Microsoft Power BI with our Mapbox integration that shows data on accidents involving cyclists in New York City so you can identify dangerous hotspots. Another trend is a different kind of storytelling. Snapchat took the idea of location and used it to create a social sharing experience on a live map that shows images and videos that people are sharing publicly. They use our mobile and web tools and a heat map effect to highlight areas where there's a lot of activity based on this live social data. This is especially interesting for this crowd during natural disasters or during civil action campaigns. Pictured here are a series of gun reform protests across the US one day. This kind of real-time social map is making a whole host of different actors think about how location can transform tools that they use to capture live news and public opinion. And then a third trend that we're seeing is around navigation and the importance of maps and location data for navigation, whether it be self-driving cars or more mundane challenges like the traveling salesperson problem, like this demo of a trucking company trying to optimize how to direct their drivers to pick up various shipments and drop them off. So far, this has been largely more kind of corporate use cases so far, but we are talking with a few of our humanitarian partners like Ushahidi, for example, about what these sorts of tools for routing and navigation could look like in a humanitarian context. And finally, some of the most out there explorations with location right now is in the world of augmented reality. With our Unity SDK, Mapbox can power world-scale and tabletop augmented reality experiences. This is a demo of adding directions and point of interest information as you walk around San Francisco interfacing with an augmented reality surface. And we do have some partners interested in the potential of AR for education or for awareness raising, and there may be other applications like public engagement with participatory planning or training in disaster simulations. I would love to explore applications of this technology if any of you have ideas. So Mapbox is growing because we create the building blocks that developers and designers need to keep up with these trends, the tools that you need to build fast and beautiful and very powerful maps and location-based services. And you can combine and tailor the pieces that you need for whatever you're building and have them work across web, mobile, and other platforms. So this way, developers can create location tools without needing to be geospatial experts and without needing to process and maintain all of the data required themselves. And at the same time, we allow for complete customizability. So for example, while other map providers might let you layer your data on top of their map, we give you access to all of the data layers and let you change them however you need. You can change the colors, the labels, the layers, everything. And you can also control where your data comes from, whether it's uploading geospatial files into your Mapbox account or pulling data from your own servers or your own APIs. So in essence, that's what's exciting about Mapbox. We provide a living map platform and a multi-purpose location toolkit that's built on fast and resilient infrastructure and let you customize it however you need, add your own data, and build with across devices. And I'm very proud to say that we have stayed true to our roots. Mapbox tools continue to be useful for many organizations with positive impact missions. In addition to providing our tools themselves, Mapbox invests in direct support to nonprofits, disaster responders, civic tech and local governments, and others. This ranges from small civil society organizations to partnerships with international NGOs. The community team, where I'm based, specializes in supporting these projects. We provide special access to technical guidance, we promote projects, and we host collaborative projects with Mapbox volunteers. So I wanted to share some examples from some of our community partners that are using these tools in practice. This first one is a project that was built by volunteers at DataKind and Mapbox for the Catholic Charities USA. And this is a map and data dashboard that allows them to visualize data about disaster vulnerability of different populations. The darker the blue, the more vulnerable the population in that area is. And users can hover over the map to explore the data in detail. And when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston last year, CCUSA used this tool to help decide where to respond first. And it's also an open source tool, so others can recreate it using the code that they built for this. Another example that draws more from that crowdsourcing idea that I spoke to before is from a team of Mapbox volunteers in our Bangalore office in India, who, when there was severe flooding in Chennai in 2015, they were concerned that there was very little up-to-date information about which parts of the city were most affected. And so they built an open source web and mobile tool to report flooded streets. And it uses data from OpenStreetMap and Mapbox's JavaScript library. You can zoom into an area, see which streets have been reported as flooded, and click on a street if you know that it's flooded. And this app got over 1 million views in a 2-week period, and since then the project has been recreated in many other cities because it's just a lightweight, easy to use, very practically useful tool. And then we also see a lot of our community partners interested in working with imagery, especially in a disaster response scenario. So this example is from Santa Rosa last year in California, where there were wildfires that devastated large neighborhoods. And we had an independent developer who wanted to create an app that would help people interact with the latest imagery that Digital Globe was releasing. So in this, the red areas are vegetation and the gray areas are burned out areas. Because these imagery files were large and difficult to interact with, Robin used Mapbox to process the imagery into a lightweight, usable, shareable map and added some features like a time slider and an address search to make it more user-friendly. And this went viral. It had millions of hits to it, but it stayed up, stayed functioning. And we also worked with others in the Santa Rosa area, emergency responders, to help them process their drone imagery in a similar way to help them in their response efforts. And then just 2 more examples, this one from Médecins Sans Frontières, working to open up a rather dense data set about their rescue missions in the Mediterranean. They wanted to help communicate what it is that they do and how their rescue missions work. So they worked with Code for Africa to build this interactive site. And similarly, the Washington Trails Association, a nonprofit here in the States, wanted to open up their database of trails and user reviews about trails in Washington and make it more usable and more interactive. So they have started a new web map, which is as slick as any commercial trail organization that's out there. And it was built all by volunteers at the Washington Trails Association. And so that's Mapbox in a whirlwind tour, and I'll hand things over to Peter from PATH now.
Great. Good morning or good evening, everyone, and thanks again for having me. My name is Peter Solar, and again, I'm responsible for managing private sector partnerships at PATH. But before we talk about some of the examples of our work with Mapbox, let me kick off with who we are and what we do. So, PATH is one of the most far-reaching global health organizations in the world, and every year we touch lives of millions of people with new vaccines, new drugs, and technologies. But an important part of our work is innovating up and down the value chain and ensuring that these life-saving solutions actually reach the people that need them the most. And what we do particularly well in this context is that we combine our global health expertise with local leadership and core business assets of our private sector partners, be it technology, talent, and resources, to truly accelerate innovation. And so today we'll spend some time talking about Visualize Malaria, which is one of our initiatives that reflects that approach and illustrates how NGOs can leverage technology solutions like mapping and location tools to their advantage. But before we dive in, let me do a bit of scene setting here and describe the issue at hand, which in our case is malaria. So if I could have the next slide, please. Great. So malaria is a complex, rapidly spreading disease that relies on mosquitoes to pass it from one person to another. And for the infected person, consequences can be life-threatening. But in 80% of cases, malaria actually hides in people who show no symptoms at all, which makes it difficult to track it down and contain. And it's really a public health emergency in many countries and still kills almost 500,000 people every year. Now, there are preventative and treatment measures that do exist to deal with malaria, but many countries find it particularly challenging to mobilize these resources, especially in an environment with major infrastructure challenges. And so, on the next slide, you can see, this is rural Zambia, where we've supported the government in their effort to eliminate the disease for the past decade. And you can see some of the challenges, some of the infrastructure challenges I alluded to in this picture. Remote communities, vast landscape, lack of reliable transportation, heavy rainfall and floods during the rain season. And when all that comes together and when you combine that with under-resourced healthcare system, it is really difficult to get to the sick people and get ahead of the disease. So if you can go to the next slide. So working with the local public health leadership, we asked ourselves, how can we better use data to overcome these challenges and manage resources more effectively? What do we know about the disease and the environment that we operate in? What do we not know? What can we do to improve how data is being collected, managed, analyzed, and acted on? And are there technology solutions that can help us build the health intelligence capacity and infrastructure to deal with the problem? So to answer these questions, we partner with Tableau, which is a data visualization software company, and launched an effort called Visualize Malaria. But as Marina pointed out earlier, location really underpins everything. And in our case, knowing where people live, how to get to them, where the resources are, where the disease is, or where it's going to be, were some of the key challenges that we were grappling with. And so that eventually led us to Mapbox. So if you go on the next slide, when Mapbox joined the Visualize Malaria initiative, one of the first things that we did together was that we mobilized the global community of volunteer mappers to trace buildings from the satellite imagery that was provided by Mapbox and Digital Globe to help us better understand where people live. And on the next slide, you can see that our volunteers then took that information and produced these highly detailed digital footprints of human settlement, which using Mapbox, we could layer over custom base maps, having a full control over different layers and showing features like roads, waterways, structures, and then bring that into Tableau to combine with other critical insights. So that, for us, solved the question of where people live and where their resources are relative to outbreaks, but we then asked ourselves, can we leverage geospatial insights to better inform where malaria is going to strike next? And so it turns out we can, and here's what we did. If you look at the next slide, we took the open data on things like channel network, topographical wetness, elevation, rainfall, and using Mapbox and a geospatial tool called QGIS that some of you may be familiar with, we created these colorful layers that would serve as inputs to model the flow of water, showing us where the water pools and creates breeding habitat for the mosquitoes. So if you go on the next slide, you can see what the output of that looks like. So the blue here shows where water is flowing, the orange is where water is pooling. Now, if you go to the next slide, you combine that information with the information on human settlement and malaria incidence data, visualize it in a Tableau dashboard like the one here, alongside other insights. The public health workers actually managing the response and looking at these dashboards are starting to get a pretty good idea about where malaria is going to strike next, which you can imagine is super important for resource mobilization efforts. And I'm going to show you one last example here. So if you go to the next slide. So in our effort to combat fast-moving outbreaks like malaria, we rely on frontline health workers to submit their data on time. And if the data doesn't come through or is incomplete, we have a system in place that sends an automated SMS alert to the health worker, reminding them to submit the report. The only and obvious catch here is that the caseworker has to be within the signal range. So to help the district workers who manage the movement of the health workers, we combine the data layers for cell tower coverage and elevation with data on the positions of the frontline health workers to visualize where they need to be located to be able to receive the alert and respond. And what all these examples have in common is that they were developed by volunteers who truly understand tools like Mapbox inside and out. And when we did not have the capacity to build something like that in-house initially, so it was essential for us to work with Mapbox, Tableau, and other partners on this effort to help us mobilize the talent and resources to develop these use cases. And so if you go to the next slide, and this is what the coolest thing about visualizing malaria is, it is that it is truly a collaborative effort between PATH, the government of Zambia, and 8 technology companies who collectively bring a very diverse set of solutions, talent, resources, and knowledge to build the kind of data analytics capacity and infrastructure that enables even a low-resource country like Zambia to take on the challenge of eliminating malaria for good. And in terms of results, if you look at the next slide, in southern Zambia, where we're piloting this collaborative data-focused approach, we've seen some promising results. The peaks you see on this chart, that's the number of cases at the height of the rainy season, when the mosquitoes are most active. So between the peak on the left in 2014 and the peak on the right last year, you're looking at a 92% drop in malaria incidence rate. And so going forward, our goal is to scale this model nationwide, help the government of Zambia bring that number down to 0, and share these tools and practices with Zambia's regional neighbors who are also prioritizing malaria elimination. And in the long run, what we've developed here is potentially a model for a health intelligence platform that could be used for other diseases and other pressing global health challenges beyond malaria. Now, if you go to the next slide, at the end of the day, given the scale and complexity involved, our success really depends on how we can collaborate as partners together and to what extent we're aligned in terms of our overarching goals, our values, and expectations. So to help us on the journey, we've put in place a set of guiding principles or a sort of charter, if you will, that places guardrails on how we engage and work together as partners to reach our shared vision. And perhaps the most important underlying principle is that we're end-user focused. In other words, we attempt to understand the needs and challenges of the people we're developing the solutions for, and we're being receptive to the cultural and operational context in which these solutions are going to be deployed. And from the collaboration standpoint, we work together in a way that truly maximizes our core competencies, but we're also committed to ensuring that we share insights, expertise, and technical knowledge to identify the best solutions. And in the process, it is absolutely critical that we encourage constructive feedback, transparency, and diversity of perspective. Sustainability-wise, we want our model to be adopted and fully utilized to its fullest potential by the global health community. So we recognize the need to invest in this effort over long run and support activities that cultivate and strengthen the culture of data that is really required for these solutions to be embraced. And finally, to be successful, and this is maybe straightforward, but it needs to be said, we really need to be the champions of this effort, to engage, inspire, and mobilize the critical stakeholders within our community and beyond, be it our volunteers, employees, customers, donors, business leaders, etc. And that means activating the right channels and getting our story out there. And if you go to the final slide, and just to wrap up, you know, the malaria elimination effort that we've embarked on here is not a straight line, and there are plenty of hurdles that still remain. But we believe that blueprint is there, the momentum is there, and we believe that partners like Mapbox are going to be a major contributing factor to our success, not just because of their technology, but because they're the kind of sensible and invested partner that listens to our needs, helps us build the right solution, mobilizes the community, amplifies our message, and is really committed to getting across the finish line together. And so I'm hoping stories like this one will encourage the listeners today to start thinking about opportunities to integrate mapping and location tools in their work, and think about how the tech sector more broadly can enable and accelerate their social impact effort. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening along, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about visualizing malaria or about our work with mapping and location tools, or if you would like to learn more about our approach to managing private sector partnerships more broadly. So thank you again.
Great. So now we're coming to talking about NetHope's experience with developing Nextlevel Maps, specifically as it relates to Mapbox and multi-NGO responses. So if we could go to the next slide. So I think all of us in the humanitarian industry know that the 2017 hurricane season was pretty intense, probably one of the most challenging that we've all experienced in recent history, especially for those that are working in the Caribbean region. For us at NetHope, something that's really unique is that, of course, we're a consortium of the world's 50-plus leading humanitarian organizations. We support developing situational awareness for our members responding all around the world. But in unique cases, NetHope will deploy its own staff to provide connectivity support for local government, for impacted communities, and for responding NGOs in an area to help get people back online, help to get organizations back online, and really to facilitate the flow of information after disaster. So in the 2017 hurricane season, NetHope provided connectivity aid. We responded to multiple islands across the Caribbean, including, I believe, Antigua and Dominica. And then, of course, we had a large response in Puerto Rico. We can go to the next slide. So as we can see, this is a snapshot that was developed, I believe, in September or October of last year. I believe the hurricane hit around August, early September. What we can see in this map that was created by Vox and was based on Mapbox and FCC information is that after Hurricane Maria swept through Puerto Rico, quite a bit of the island was offline. And so what we decided as NetHope is that we wanted to do was we wanted to go into the island and we wanted to provide connectivity where it was needed most. But we were challenged in that there wasn't a lot of information, authoritative information coming out about where connectivity was out. We got a call from Facebook, or an email from Facebook saying we have some information that could be useful to help you understand where connectivity has been lost, where connectivity is needed most, and so if it would be helpful to you, we'll send you the data that we have, and then you can analyze it, visualize it, and let it help you inform your response strategy. So if you go to the next slide. So this is a map that we created based off of the information that Facebook gave to us. Two important notes to consider here. One is that the information that Facebook gave us was anonymized and was de-identified. So they weren't giving us raw data on specific, specific user locations, but an aggregated view of what connectivity looks like based off of user information across the island. Two, the second note is that even though we were provided aggregated anonymized information, it was still an incredible amount of data. So when we're talking about Nextlevel Maps, we're not just talking about the integration of AR, the integration of VR, using new navigation tools. We're also talking about the use and utilization of large amounts of private sector data. And so while we in Crisis Informatics were looking at, how can we make sense of the information that was given to us while also handling all the other responsibilities that we have, we thankfully got another email, this time from the community team at Mapbox saying, let us assist you, we'll provide volunteer pro bono service, and we'll help you make sense of what is now available to you. So if you look at this map on your screen, what you can see is that at this point in time, I think it was November, where all of the areas on the map that are blue is where connectivity has been restored at that point, but the strength is really low. The places that are getting more white is where connectivity is strong, which is not many places at that point in time. Places that are in orange is where connectivity was still completely out. And so the triangles and the dots on the map are where our response team had decided to place connectivity support across the island, particularly in places that were still orange or very, very dark blue. We can go to the next slide. So here's another visual that was created with the help of Mapbox's community team using Facebook's data. And this is looking at the information that we got over time from Facebook, looking at the strength of connectivity across the island. With blue, where you can see the dark blue is where connectivity keeps on dropping or going low. And then the dots that you see over time, the teal dots, are where we as NetHope had set up different response locations across the island. Next slide. So all in all, we set up I think almost 99 connectivity spots across the island over time, and about 40 of those were open Wi-Fi hotspots, so anyone in the local community could come and access internet to send and share important information. Next slide. Looking ahead, we're doing a few things here at NetHope. One, we're engaged in a couple of really important preparedness efforts when it comes to the Caribbean, preparing for potentially another extremely challenging hurricane season. We're pre-positioning our connectivity equipment in South America. We're also starting to research and curate the kind of large data sets that we might need to use again over time. But we're also being even more proactive than before in engaging private sector partners that might want to, one, share important information with us that might come in very, very large packages, and also engaging partners like Mapbox who can help make sense of that information, start thinking through now, how can we make that process as easy as possible, not just for ourselves in our response team at NetHope, but for anyone in the humanitarian sector that in our consortium that would benefit from seeing that kind of private sector information as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a couple of things when it comes to using or creating Nextlevel maps, particularly when it comes to private sector information. These are a few things that we learned that we think is important to share on this webinar. One, it's really important that we've learned to build relationships ahead of time. We found that our private sector partners are really hungry for information and understanding what's useful and what's not. And that can be really challenging to do when you're helping to support emergency response efforts on the ground. So establishing relationships ahead of time, establishing communication channels, communication styles ahead of time is really, really important. And also discussing and refining expectations as to how we're going to share feedback, and particularly for organizations that can help make sense of the data, like Mapbox community, understanding what their constraints and limits are, and what our constraints as NetHope or a humanitarian NGO are. Third, we found that it's really important to have someone who's technically savvy to manage relationships between a humanitarian NGO and a more technical partner, either helping to make sense of the information or that's giving you the information. Someone that can speak multiple languages in terms of humanitarian lingo and technology lingo. It really helps to make sure that everyone's on the same page and understanding how collaboration can continue to be fostered. Fourth, designing a process to track impacts and challenges is really important, especially if new tools. We found that with testing and using new tools with Facebook's disaster maps data and engaging with Mapbox community teams, I wish for myself that I had dedicated more time to tracking all of the different ways that our partners had impacted our response, but also to track some of the challenges so that we could address those afterwards to make for more easy information sharing afterwards. And then also, lastly, what we're doing now is we are taking some of the challenges that we saw, and we are taking some of the really positive things that happened to help our private sector partners develop tools today so that they're easier to use tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Marina, but I really do want to take a moment to thank the American Red Cross, who was a huge support to us on the technical side and also a response side, but they helped us also to make sense of the information that Facebook had given to us. But also to thank Mapbox's community team, which really went the extra 10 miles to help us when we were in a very intense hurricane response across multiple islands. All right, so on to Marina to wrap us up, and then we'll get into Q&A.
Okay, I think I'm back now. Great. Thank you so much, Peter and Gabby. It's been really wonderful to learn alongside you and work on these projects. So it's wonderful to share these sort of summary case studies, and I really appreciate your reflections about, real talk about what it's like to work with a private sector partner and some of the things that folks should expect if they're embarking upon that. And I wanted to continue that with just a few reflections and takeaways from other experiences with nonprofit and humanitarian partners that we've seen so far in terms of what it takes to build with Mapbox tools. First and foremost, Mapbox builds tools for developers. We build APIs, we build SDKs for different platforms. To create interactive web maps with Mapbox GLJS, you need to use JavaScript. So the heart of our tools are not out-of-the-box solutions. They are the pieces that you need to build something. And that's why they're so flexible. That's why you can do so many different things with them. But this does mean that you're going to need to have a developer or developer skills somewhere on your team, either in-house, through contractors, or from committed volunteers. There are some things that you can do with Mapbox without code, for example, making custom style base maps, or via other integrations with tools you might use like Microsoft Power BI or Tableau. But for the most part, someone's going to need to touch code. And from our perspective, the ideal team pairs geographic or cartographic skills with developer skills and enough time to do the design and building and iteration that it requires. These aren't drag and drop tools, as it were. And sort of building on that point too, aside from developer skills and design skills, you also need skills for working with data. And Gabby touched on this. It's working with these kinds of maps and these large data sets, it's actually quite easy to misinterpret the data or misrepresent the data on a map. So having folks with data analysis skills on your team is vital if you're going to be engaging with some of these complicated data sets. And on the data theme, again, often the scope of what you can do with tools like this is limited by your data. Understanding your data early on in a map design process really helps. So many projects with partners spend the biggest chunk of time on preparing the data, cleaning the data, transforming the data, and troubleshooting their data sets. So having the data ready and in a format that works well for web maps is a huge first step. And a lot of the workflows needed to create maps like you've seen today don't only use Mapbox. Folks are using databases, they're using Excel, they're using desktop GIS software like QGIS to prepare their data. So you don't want to be trying to do a lot of complex analysis or data transformations within your JavaScript. While we do have tools to let you do some on-the-fly analysis, and we have some very useful data processing tools in our toolkit, you can't overlook the steps for data prep and processing. And also on the side of map design, while these tools are incredibly flexible, this means that you can pretty much create anything. Sometimes that anything can be very ugly or it can be very confusing to use. So it's important to have some design skills in the mix to keep you focused on your goals, to keep you focused on your end users, like Peter was saying. Just because you can do a lot of flashy things with maps, it might not be furthering your goal, and it might actually be making the map more confusing to interact with. And then finally, as Gabby was saying, a lot of these map projects take a lot of time to build. The data takes time to prep, the design takes time to iterate, and the development takes troubleshooting time. So if you're working in disaster response or you have tight project timelines, prepare as early as you can. Get in touch with us early. Get your data ready as early as you can, and work proactively to prepare tools that might be useful in a more urgent situation. So those are some high-level reflections from working with partners. All that said, it's easy to get started with Mapbox. Anyone can create an account. It's free to start. We have a very generous free threshold, and the community team is here to help you with any questions about accounts. We don't want costs to be a blocker for any of you to use our tools, so we can definitely help with coupons and discounts and all that. And we have a lot of great learning resources on our website if you do want to build up your skills for working with these tools directly, from tutorials to very comprehensive documentation. And if you're not so keen on actually, learning all of those skills yourself, we also can help you connect with developers who are very experienced in building with Mapbox tools through our developer network. And we can help you craft your request to connect with a developer successfully. And so with that, we're here to help at the community team. We'd love to explore ideas with you, hear about your mapping needs. We chat with teams at all stages of projects and ideas, and we will tailor how we work with you based on your needs and how you prefer to work. So please do get in touch. And I think I'll leave it there, and we can turn to questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thank you, Marina. Thank you, Peter. We're going to use the last minutes to throw out some questions that have been shared during the webinar. If you have any that come to mind and you're listening now, please drop them in the chat window and we will share them as we have time. So first, to Marina, when we're talking about maps and text trends, can you talk about what might be involved in terms of taking advantage or exploring how AI and machine learning and even predictive analysis can be integrated into geospatial operations?
Yeah, definitely. Machine learning and AI are very hot topics in the mapping space as well, and we do have several teams here at Mapbox working on tools there. One recent tool that we actually just open sourced is called Rosa, and it lets you build training algorithms to automatically extract features from satellite imagery. So, for example, if you're working in a part of the world where OpenStreetMap is missing most of the buildings, for example, or some of the buildings, you can use RoboSat to identify and kind of help guide you where they're likely missing buildings and speed up your tracing process, for example. We are in conversation with a number of different satellite imagery companies like Digital Globe about what they're doing around machine learning too. It's something where there's great potential, and I have seen some interesting use cases proposed, but I'm also I hope for more collaboration in this space with folks sharing the algorithms that they're training, sharing the data, the sets that they're creating, and making it more open. So I was really, really proud that Mapbox decided to open source our RoboSat tool and hope that some good collaboration can come from that.
Wonderful. And Peter, is PATH looking at taking advantage of AI and machine learning? And if so, what kind of private sector partners are you engaging for that?
Yes, definitely. So this is an area, that's super exciting and that we've been looking at both in terms of, things like location and also with things like, developing new drugs and vaccines and other interventions. And to give you an example of a private sector partner, other than Mapbox, we've been in conversations with Digital Globe as well. We know that they have some powerful tools that we could potentially use. So yeah, we're definitely thinking about that, and we realize, that we need to stay on top of these new developments and new trends if we are to remain on the cutting edge of innovation in global health.
Wonderful. Continuing with you, Peter, a question that has come up is, when PATH selected Mapbox as a platform, did you compare tools or does it represent a part of a broader GIS toolbox?
Yeah, a very good question. So PATH, in our approach, we're trying to be really agnostic and we're trying to select the best tool for the context and for the situation. So for this particular tool, when we were introduced to Mapbox, we knew what the tool could do and we loved the concept, but we didn't necessarily have the in-house talent to fully leverage its potential. So working with volunteers, they showed us what is possible and how we could turn some of our initial ideas into operational tools. And based on that, and just based on the overall relationship with Mapbox, we then we're able to, so Mapbox then, became the right tool for that particular context and the particular issue that we were dealing with. But yeah, overall, we are open to exploring other tools in our other projects. There is a broader variety of tools that we're using. I mentioned Digital Globe earlier here. In our effort around Ebola response in Democratic Republic of Congo, for instance.
Wonderful. Marina, a question for you. Can you talk a little bit more about the process to engage the community team at Mapbox? What does that look like, and what kind of organizations are you interested in supporting?
That's a great question, Gabby. So yeah, and I saw also in the chat there was a question about, well, how do we engage with volunteers at Mapbox? And so to answer both of those at once, if you're interested in working with volunteers at Mapbox, contact the community team. If you go to the community team's webpage, which is just mapbox.com/community, there is a way to get in touch with us there, and it'll be prompted to answer just a few short questions in a form so we can get a start on understanding your use case. And then what to expect, first we like to start with a getting to know you call to discuss your work and discuss how you're interested in using maps or how you're currently using maps and data. Pretty early on in the process, if it looks like we'll either be doing some more intensive troubleshooting with you or collaborating on a project, we'll ask you to share some data or like a sample data set so that we can get a sense of what sorts of fields are in your data and potential data challenges and limitations. And then if it's a collaborative project, we'll reach a point where we agree on a clear defined scope with some specific outputs as well, so we can make sure that our volunteers are being matched with a project that has a clear output. In terms of the types of organizations that we like to work with, it's more about kind of characteristics of the organization and the project versus a specific sector or specific size of organization or anything like that. We work with learners. We don't want to create dependency, so we prefer to work on projects where there's someone on the partner team who is learning alongside us about how to use the tools, what these tools can do, what's required to use them. So that's definitely something we look for. Also, flexible timelines, or as much time as you can allow is best, especially if we're trying to recruit volunteers. And also, we also like to work with organizations that are open to either open sourcing their project and sharing the code itself so others can replicate it, or documenting their process in detail so that others can benefit from what you've learned and replicate what you've built. And then finally, we like to work with partners who want to spread the word about their experience, and we can help spread the word about what they're building. But we want to get the word out there to more organizations about what's possible using tools like this. So those are some of the main things that we look for at the community team.
Great. And for our last question, Peter, this will go to you. It looks like it takes a village when it comes to assembling partners to reach one technological vision. For projects that PATH takes on, are there a quote-unquote constellation of partners that you find needs to be assembled before giving or getting a certain project started?
This is a really good question. So for us, and as far as visualizing malaria goes, again, it all started with the need and asking the right question, asking the questions that we needed to answer. And the first piece for us, the first piece of puzzle for us was, sorting out data visualization. That was the most obvious need at the beginning for us. So we knocked on Tableau's door, and they loved the challenge, and they joined the partnership. So initially, when Visualize No Malaria launched, it was just PATH and Tableau. And then Tableau mobilized their community of their superstar users called Zen Masters to help us not just understand the tool, but to leverage its full potential. And then as these Zen Masters that were supporting this project became more familiar with the need in Zambia, they actually helped us identify additional tools that could make our work more efficient, and other partners that they recommended we reach out to. They'd be like, hey, have you guys heard of Mapbox or Alteryx or others? And they'd show us a few jobs and we'd say, wow, can we talk to these guys? And so the next thing you know, the director of Tableau Foundation is making a call to someone in Mapbox to make an introduction. And so the same thing would then happen with other partners who share the same enthusiasm. And it was a true cascade effect and a very organic progress. And now we're fortunate to work with this amazing group that came together over the course of 2 years that includes, again, not just our technology partners, but their community teams, their talent, their users, and so forth. And there's still capabilities that we're looking for, and there's still challenges that we're experiencing in terms of technology. So, you know, that constellation of partners is still not finalized, and it's evolving over the process.
This has been fantastic. Thank you very much, Gabby, for organizing this, and for Marina and Peter for incredibly useful information and great examples. We are coming to the top of the hour. There are a few other questions that were asked, but we probably not going to have time to cover. There is Marina just put some information about pricing and cost information in the chat window, so people should feel free to click through on that. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending out an update to you with a link to the recording of this webinar and the slides, so you should be able to not only review this later on, but also share it with colleagues and friends. And last but not least, I really want to thank the audience for super insightful questions, and appreciate you making this as interactive as we have. So with that, I'll ask you to please take a minute or two to answer the webinar satisfaction poll that will pop up on your screen as you leave today, and wish everybody a great rest of your day. And we will be back in touch really soon. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.